Welcome to the incredible story of Arizona, a land where ancient civilizations built magnificent cities in the desert, where Spanish conquistadors searched for gold, and where the American frontier spirit created one of the most unique states in our union. From the towering red rocks of Sedona to the vast expanse of the Sonoran Desert, from the engineering marvel of the Grand Canyon to the bustling metropolis of Phoenix, Arizona's history is as dramatic and colorful as its stunning landscapes. Today, we'll journey through over 12,000 years of human history in the Grand Canyon state. We'll meet the Hohokam people who created one of the most sophisticated irrigation systems in North America, Spanish explorers who gave Arizona its name, Mexican settlers who established ranches across the territory, American pioneers who braved Apache raids to strike it rich in silver mines, and the modern visionaries who transformed a harsh desert into one of America's fastest growing regions. So, grab your water bottle and your sense of adventure. We're about to explore the remarkable history of Arizona. Chapter 1: Ancient Arizona. The First Peoples, the Prehistoric Era, 12,000 BCE, 1000 CE. Long before European explorers ever dreamed of the New World, Arizona was home to some of North America's most sophisticated civilizations. The story begins over 12,000 years ago, when Paleo-Indians first arrived in what would become Arizona. These early peoples were nomadic hunters who pursued massive Ice Age mammals like mammoths, giant ground sloths, and ancient bison across the landscape. As the climate warmed and these megafauna disappeared around 8000 BCE, the people adapted, developing what archaeologists call the Archaic culture. They learned to hunt smaller game and gather desert plants, developing an intimate knowledge of the harsh but resource-rich Sonoran Desert environment. Archaeological sites like Ventana Cave show us that these people developed sophisticated tools and lived in Arizona continuously for thousands of years. The Hohokam, masters of the desert, 300, 1450 CE. Around 300 CE, one of North America's most remarkable civilizations emerged in the Salt River Valley, the Hohokam. The name Hohokam comes from a Pima word meaning those who have gone, and for good reason. They seemingly vanished from history around 1450 CE, leaving behind one of the most impressive archaeological legacies in North America. The Hohokam were master engineers who transformed the Sonoran Desert into a thriving agricultural region. They constructed over 1,000 miles of irrigation canals, some stretching up to 20 miles long, that brought water from the Salt and Gila rivers to thousands of acres of farmland. These weren't simple ditches, they were sophisticated waterways with headgates, distribution systems, and maintenance schedules that rival modern irrigation projects. At the height of their civilization, the Hohokam built Snaketown, a massive settlement that housed thousands of people. They traded with civilizations as far away as central Mexico, importing parrots, copper bells, and cacao, while exporting their beautiful shell jewelry and pottery throughout the Southwest. Perhaps most mysteriously, the Hohokam built over 200 ball courts, oval-shaped earthen structures that may have been used for ceremonial games similar to those played by the Maya and Aztecs. The largest of these courts could hold over 1,000 spectators, suggesting a complex social and religious life. The Hohokam also left us Pueblo Grande, located in modern-day Phoenix, where you can still see the remains of their massive platform mounds and irrigation canals. These structures required incredible coordination and labor, suggesting a sophisticated society with skilled leadership and engineering knowledge. The ancestral Puebloans, 100, 1300 CE, in northern Arizona, another remarkable civilization was taking shape. The ancestral Puebloans, formerly known as the Anasazi, these were the architects of some of the most spectacular ruins in North America, including those found in Cañon de Chelly and at Wupatki National Monument. The ancestral Puebloans began as simple farmers around 100 CE, but by 1000 CE, they were building massive stone cities that housed thousands of people. Their Pueblo-style architecture, with its multi-story stone buildings and intricate masonry, influenced construction techniques that are still used in the Southwest today. These people were also master astronomers and mathematicians. At sites like Casa Grande ruins, they built structures aligned with celestial events, the summer solstice, winter solstice, and lunar cycles. Their calendar system was so accurate that they could predict eclipses and plan their agricultural activities with remarkable precision. Other indigenous cultures. Arizona was also home to the Sinagua people in the Flagstaff area, who built remarkable cliff dwellings like those at Montezuma Castle and Tuzigut. The Salado culture in southeastern Arizona created stunning polychrome pottery that is considered among the finest in the prehistoric Southwest. But perhaps most importantly, Arizona was and continues to be home to numerous tribal nations whose histories extend back thousands of years. The Tohono O'odham, who may be descendants of the Hohokam, the Hopi, whose villages on the mesas are among the oldest continuously inhabited settlements in North America. The Navajo, Diné, who migrated to the region around 1400 CE and became one of the largest tribal nations in the United States, and many others, including the Apache, Pima, Maricopa, Havasupai, Hualapai, Yavapai, and Colorado River tribes. These indigenous peoples didn't simply disappear when Europeans arrived. They continued to inhabit Arizona, adapting to new circumstances while maintaining their cultural traditions, languages, and connections to the land. Chapter 2, Spanish Arizona, the Age of Exploration. The first Europeans arrive, 1539 to 1542. The first European to set foot in Arizona was most likely Fray Marcos de Niza, a Franciscan friar who entered the territory in 1539. He was searching for the legendary Seven Cities of Gold, Cibola, based on reports from earlier expeditions. Though Fray Marcos claimed to have seen golden cities shining in the distance, he never actually reached them. His reports excited Spanish colonial authorities, leading to one of the most ambitious expeditions in North American history. In 1540, Francisco Vázquez de Coronado launched a massive expedition with over 1,000 men, Spanish soldiers, Mexican allies, African slaves, and thousands of horses, cattle, and sheep. This was essentially a mobile city crossing the harsh desert landscape. Coronado's expedition was the first to comprehensively explore what would become Arizona. They encountered Hopi villages, marveled at the Grand Canyon, which they considered an obstacle rather than a natural wonder, and pushed as far east as Kansas searching for gold. Garcia Lopez de Cardenas became the first European to see the Grand Canyon, though his men were unable to descend into it and estimated it to be only 6 feet deep. A slight miscalculation of about 5,994 feet. The expedition was considered a failure because they found no gold, but it established Spanish claims to the region and provided the first European descriptions of Arizona's peoples and landscapes. The mission period, 1687-1767. The real transformation of Arizona began in 1687 when Father Eusebio Francisco Kino arrived in the region. Kino was a remarkable figure, a Jesuit priest who was also a cartographer, astronomer, mathematician, and explorer. Over the next 24 years, he would travel over 50,000 miles through Arizona and Sonora, establishing missions and mapping the region with remarkable accuracy. Father Kino founded several missions in southern Arizona, including San Xavier del Bac near modern-day Tucson. He introduced European crops like wheat and grapes, European livestock, including cattle and horses, and new agricultural techniques that transformed the economy of southern Arizona. He also proved that Baja California was a peninsula, not an island, by creating the first accurate maps of the region. Kino's approach was different from many Spanish colonial efforts. He learned local languages, respected indigenous customs, and generally maintained peaceful relations with local tribes. He established over 20 missions and converted thousands of Native Americans to Christianity, though often these conversions blended Christian and indigenous beliefs in syncretic ways. After Kino's death in 1711, other priests continued his work, but with less success. The Pima Revolt of 1751, led by Luis Oaxpicagigua, demonstrated growing tensions between Spanish authorities and indigenous peoples over forced labor, cultural suppression, and territorial disputes. Spanish settlement and administration. During the Spanish period, Arizona was part of the vast viceroyalty of New Spain, administered from Mexico City. The region was organized under the province of Sonora, and Spanish authority was light and intermittent. Most Spanish settlement concentrated in the Santa Cruz River Valley in southern Arizona, where missions, presidios, military posts, and small towns developed. The Spanish established several presidios to protect their settlements and trade routes, including Tubac, 1752, and Tucson, 1775. These weren't large cities. Tucson, for example, had perhaps 1,000 residents at its peak during the Spanish period, but they served as important centers of Spanish culture and administration. Spanish influence on Arizona was profound and lasting. They introduced the horse, which revolutionized life for indigenous peoples across the region. They brought cattle ranching, which became central to Arizona's economy. They established trade routes connecting Arizona to California, New Mexico, and central Mexico. They gave Arizona many of its place names: Tucson, Ajo, Yuma, Casa Grande, and even Arizona itself, which likely comes from the O'odham word Alisonac, meaning small spring, the end of Spanish rule. By the early 1800s, Spanish power in North America was weakening. The Napoleonic Wars in Europe drained Spanish resources, and independence movements were stirring throughout Latin America. Apache raids increased in frequency and intensity, making Spanish settlements increasingly dangerous and economically unviable. In 1821, Mexico achieved independence from Spain, and Arizona became part of the newly independent Mexican nation. The Spanish period in Arizona was ending, but its cultural, architectural, and linguistic influences would remain forever embedded in Arizona's identity. Chapter 3: Mexican Arizona. A brief but transformative period. Arizona under Mexican rule, 1821-1848. When Mexico gained independence from Spain in 1821, Arizona became part of the Mexican state of Sonora. This was a period of significant change and challenge for the region. The new Mexican government was poorly equipped to govern its vast northern territories, and Arizona, already remote and sparsely populated, became even more isolated from central authority. The Mexican period brought both opportunities and disasters to Arizona. On one hand, Mexico opened trade with the United States, leading to increased commerce along routes like the Old Spanish Trail and the Santa Fe Trail. American mountain men and traders began appearing in Arizona, hunting for beaver and trading with local populations. However, the Mexican government also withdrew many of the Spanish military garrisons that had protected settlements from Apache raids. The result was catastrophic for many communities. Towns like Tubac were repeatedly attacked and temporarily abandoned. The population of southern Arizona actually declined during the Mexican period as people fled the increasing violence. The scalp bounty system, desperate to stop Apache raids, Mexican authorities implemented one of the most brutal policies in Arizona history, the scalp bounty system. The government offered payments for Apache scalps, $100 for an adult male, $50 for a woman, and $25 for a child. This policy attracted bounty hunters from across the frontier, including the infamous James Johnson and John Glanton gangs. The scalp bounty system was not only morally horrific, but also counterproductive. Bounty hunters couldn't distinguish between hostile and peaceful Indians, and they often killed peaceful groups, or even Mexicans with dark hair to collect bounties. This led to cycles of revenge and violence that made the region even more dangerous. Mexican land grants. Despite the violence, the Mexican government did attempt to encourage settlement through land grants. Mexican law allowed much larger land grants than Spanish law had permitted, leading to the establishment of several large ranches in Arizona. These grants would later become sources of significant legal disputes when Arizona became part of the United States. The most famous of these grants was the Baca Float, a massive land grant that could be located anywhere in Arizona. After the American conquest, the grant holders used this flexibility to claim some of the richest mineral lands in the territory, leading to decades of legal battles. American influence grows. Even during the Mexican period, American influence in Arizona was growing. American trappers like James Ohio Patty explored much of the region, writing some of the first detailed English language descriptions of Arizona. American merchants established trading posts and began to dominate commerce in the region. The Mormon Battalion passed through Arizona in 1846 during the Mexican-American War, and their detailed reports of the region's resources and geography would later influence American settlement patterns. Kit Carson, the famous frontiersman, also traveled through Arizona multiple times during this period, helping to map routes and establish connections between Arizona and other parts of the American West. The Mexican-American War and the end of Mexican Arizona. The Mexican-American War, 1846-1848, officially ended Mexican control of Arizona, though the change had little immediate practical effect on daily life in the territory. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848 transferred Arizona north of the Gila River to the United States, while the area south of the Gila remained Mexican territory until the Gadsden Purchase in 1854. For Mexican citizens living in Arizona, the treaty guaranteed they could keep their property and become American citizens if they chose. However, the reality was often more complicated. as language barriers, legal differences, and cultural prejudices made it difficult for many Mexican families to maintain their land holdings under American law. The Mexican period in Arizona was brief, only 27 years, but it established patterns that would influence the territory's development for decades. The breakdown of governmental authority, the increase in lawlessness, and the growth of American economic influence during the Mexican period all shaped how Arizona developed after it became American territory. Chapter 4: American Territorial Period. Frontier, Arizona. Becoming American Territory, 1848-1863. Arizona's path to American statehood was complicated and contentious. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848 brought northern Arizona into the United States as part of New Mexico Territory, but the region south of the Gila River remained in Mexican hands until the Gadsden Purchase in 1854. The Gadsden Purchase was driven by railroad interests who wanted a southern route to California, but it cost the United States $10 million, a massive sum at the time, for what many Americans considered worthless desert. The purchase brought Tucson and the rich mineral regions of southern Arizona into American hands, but it also made the United States responsible for controlling Apache raids, something neither Spain nor Mexico had successfully accomplished. For nearly 15 years, Arizona remained part of New Mexico territory, but distance and cultural differences created tensions between Arizona and the territorial capital in Santa Fe. Arizonans felt neglected by territorial authorities and began demanding separate territorial status as early as the 1850s. The Civil War comes to Arizona. The Civil War brought both crisis and opportunity to Arizona. When the war began in 1861, many Confederate sympathizers in southern Arizona saw an opportunity to join the Confederacy. In March 1862, Confederate forces under Captain Sherrod Hunter occupied Tucson and declared Arizona a Confederate territory. The Confederates hoped to use Arizona as a corridor to reach California and its gold fields, but their occupation was brief and largely symbolic. Union forces from California, led by General James Henry Carleton, marched east along the Gila River and drove the Confederates out of Arizona by May 1862. More importantly, for Arizona's future, the Civil War created the political opportunity for separate territorial status. With Southern congressmen out of the Union, Republicans in Congress were willing to create new territories that might eventually become Republican states. On February 24, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Organic Act creating Arizona Territory, with its capital initially established at Prescott. Territorial government and early development. Arizona's first territorial governor was John N. Goodwin, a Republican from Maine who arrived in Arizona in 1864. The territorial government faced enormous challenges: a tiny population scattered across a vast area, ongoing warfare with Apache tribes, limited economic development, and virtually no infrastructure. The territorial capital moved frequently in these early years, from Prescott to Tucson in 1867, back to Prescott in 1877, and finally to Phoenix in 1889. These moves reflected political struggles between different regions of the territory and competition for the economic benefits that came with hosting the territorial government. Despite these challenges, Arizona began to develop rapidly during the territorial period. The discovery of rich mineral deposits led to mining booms throughout the territory. Gold was discovered near Prescott in the 1860s, leading to Arizona's first major mining boom. Silver was found at Tombstone in the 1870s, creating one of the most famous mining camps in the American West, the Apache Wars, 1849 1886. No aspect of territorial Arizona history was more significant or tragic than the prolonged warfare between American authorities and Apache tribes. The Apache Wars lasted nearly 40 years and involved some of the most famous figures in Western American history. The conflict had multiple causes. The Apache had been raiding settlements for generations as part of their traditional economy and warfare practices. The arrival of American miners and settlers disrupted traditional Apache territories and resources. American military tactics were often brutal and indiscriminate, targeting peaceful Apache along with hostile ones. Key figures in the Apache Wars included Mangas Coloradas, a Chiricahua Apache leader who initially sought peace with Americans but was betrayed and killed by soldiers in 1863. Cochise, another Chiricahua leader, waged war against Arizona settlements for over a decade after his father-in-law was wrongly accused of kidnapping and hanged by American authorities. The most famous Apache leader was Geronimo Goyatle, whose repeated escapes from reservations and raids across the border into Mexico made him a legendary figure. Geronimo's final surrender in 1886 effectively ended the Apache Wars and opened Arizona to rapid development. The human cost of these wars was enormous. Hundreds of American settlers, soldiers, and Apache people died in the conflict. The wars also severely limited economic development and settlement throughout much of Arizona for nearly 4 decades. Mining booms and boomtowns. Mining was the driving force behind Arizona's territorial development. The territory's mineral wealth was extraordinary. Gold, silver, copper, lead, and zinc were found throughout the territory, creating boomtowns that appeared almost overnight. Tombstone, founded in 1878 after Ed Schieffelin discovered silver in the Dragoon Mountains, became the most famous of Arizona's mining towns. At its peak, Tombstone had over 10,000 residents, making it larger than either Tucson or Prescott. The town was home to the famous gunfight at the OK Corral in 1881, involving the Earp brothers, Doc Holliday, and the Clanton and McClory families. Bisbee, in the Mule Mountains of southeastern Arizona, became one of the world's leading copper producers. The Copper Queen mine, opened in the 1880s, produced over 8 billion pounds of copper over its lifetime and made Bisbee one of the most cosmopolitan cities between El Paso and Los Angeles. Globe, Jerome, Clifton, and dozens of other mining towns sprang up throughout the territory. These communities were remarkably diverse, attracting miners from Mexico, China, Ireland, Cornwall, Germany, and elsewhere. This diversity created both opportunities and tensions that would influence Arizona's culture for generations. Transportation Revolution. Arizona's development during the territorial period was greatly aided by improvements in transportation. The first major breakthrough was the establishment of regular stagecoach service. The Butterfield Overland Stage, operating from 1858 to 1861, carried passengers and mail from Missouri to California through southern Arizona, dramatically reducing travel times and improving communication with the outside world. Even more transformative was the arrival of the railroad. The Southern Pacific Railroad reached Tucson in 1880 and connected Arizona to national markets for the first time. The Atlantic and Pacific Railroad, later the Santa Fe, crossed northern Arizona in the 1880s, opening that region to development and tourism. The railroads didn't just transport goods, And people, they literally created new communities. Flagstaff, Winslow, Holbrook, and Williams all owe their existence to railroad construction. The railroads also made Arizona's mining operations more profitable by providing cheap transportation for ore and supplies. Agricultural development. While mining dominated territorial Arizona's economy, agriculture was also important, particularly in the Salt River Valley around Phoenix. Mormon settlers, arriving in the 1870s, established some of the first successful farming communities in central Arizona. They were followed by other settlers who recognized the agricultural potential of Arizona's river valleys. The key to agricultural success was irrigation, and territorial Arizona saw the construction of several major irrigation projects. The Arizona Canal Company, founded in the 1880s, constructed canals that brought water to hundreds of thousands of acres in the Salt River Valley. These early irrigation projects laid the foundation for the massive federal water projects that would later make Arizona one of the nation's leading agricultural producers. Social and cultural development. Territorial Arizona was a rough, masculine society where violence was common and formal institutions were weak. However, even in this frontier environment, communities worked to establish schools, churches, newspapers, and other institutions of civilized society. The territorial period saw the establishment of Arizona's first institutions of higher education, including the University of Arizona in Tucson, 1885, and Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, 1899. These institutions were crucial for training teachers, engineers, and other professionals needed for Arizona's development. Women played important roles in territorial Arizona, though they often faced significant challenges and discrimination. Some, like Josephine Sarah Marcus, later Josephine Earp, became famous as part of Arizona's frontier legends. Others, like Pauline Cushman and Pearl Hart, gained notoriety as performers and outlaws. Many more worked as teachers, nurses, business owners, and community leaders, helping to bring stability and civilization to frontier communities. The territorial period also saw increasing racial and ethnic tensions. Chinese immigrants faced severe discrimination and violence, culminating in anti-Chinese riots in several Arizona communities. Mexican Americans, despite legal guarantees in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, often found their property rights challenged and their political participation limited. African Americans, both free blacks and former slaves, found opportunities in territorial Arizona, but also faced segregation and discrimination. The push for statehood. By the 1890s, many Arizonans believed their territory was ready for statehood. The population had grown to over 100,000. The economy was diversifying beyond mining, and territorial institutions were becoming more sophisticated. However, the path to statehood proved difficult. Congress was reluctant to admit Arizona as a state for several reasons. The territory's small population was scattered across a vast area. Its economy was heavily dependent on mining, which Congress viewed as unstable. Most importantly, Arizona was heavily Democratic at a time when Republicans controlled Congress and the presidency. Various statehood proposals were introduced in Congress throughout the 1890s and early 1900s, but they all failed. The most controversial proposal came in 1906 when Congress offered to admit Arizona and New Mexico as a single state called Montezuma. This proposal was deeply unpopular in both territories and was decisively rejected by Arizona voters. It would take until 1912, and significant changes in both Arizona and national politics before Arizona would finally achieve statehood. Chapter 5: Early Statehood and the Copper State Achieving Statehood. 1912, Arizona finally achieved statehood on February 14th, 1912, becoming the 48th state in the Union. The path to statehood had been long and frustrating, delayed by concerns about Arizona's small population, economic instability, and political orientation. The final push for statehood came during the Progressive Era, when national political sentiment favored expanding democracy and self-governance. President William Howard Taft, though initially skeptical of Arizona statehood, eventually supported it as part of a broader Republican strategy to create new states before the 1912 elections. Arizona's state constitution, drafted in 1910, was one of the most progressive in the nation. It included provisions for women's suffrage, the initiative and referendum, and the recall of judges, features that were considered radical at the time. President Taft initially refused to sign the statehood bill because of the judicial recall provision, forcing Arizona to temporarily remove it from the Constitution. Arizonans promptly restored judicial recall after statehood was achieved. George W. P. Hunt became Arizona's first governor, and he would serve longer than any other Arizona governor, 7 terms over 25 years. Hunt was a progressive Democrat who championed labor rights, women's suffrage, and social reform. His long tenure reflected Arizona's strongly democratic political orientation during its early statehood years. World War I and economic boom. Arizona's economy boomed during World War I, driven primarily by copper mining. Copper was essential for military equipment, electrical systems, and ammunition, and Arizona was the nation's leading copper producer. Towns like Bisbee, Globe, and Jerome experienced unprecedented prosperity as copper prices soared. However, wartime prosperity also brought labor conflicts and social tensions. The industrial workers of the world, IWW, known as Wobblies, organized strikes in Arizona's copper mines, demanding better wages and working conditions. Mining companies and local authorities responded harshly to these labor actions. The most notorious incident occurred in Bisbee in 1917, when local authorities and mining company officials rounded up over 1,100 suspected labor agitators and their sympathizers and illegally deported them to the New Mexico desert. The Bisbee deportation was a clear violation of constitutional rights, but it effectively broke the IWW's power in Arizona and demonstrated the political influence of mining interests. Arizona also contributed significantly to the war effort beyond copper production. The state's clear skies and open spaces made it ideal for military training, and several training bases were established, laying the foundation for Arizona's important role in military aviation. The 1920s, growth and challenges. The 1920s brought continued growth to Arizona, but also new challenges. The post-war economic boom continued to drive migration to the state, and Arizona's population grew by over 30% during the decade. Phoenix began its transformation from a small agricultural center to a major southwestern city, while Tucson grew as well, though more slowly. Tourism began to emerge as an important part of Arizona's economy during the 1920s. The completion of transcontinental highways made Arizona more accessible to automobile tourists, and the state's dramatic landscapes, Native American cultures, and frontier history attracted increasing numbers of visitors. Resorts and guest ranches were established to cater to wealthy tourists seeking a Western experience. However, the 1920s also brought the end of Arizona's first mining boom. Copper prices collapsed after the war, and many mining towns that had thrived during the war years became ghost towns almost overnight. Jerome, which had once boasted a population of 15,000, saw its population drop to fewer than 5,000 by 1930. Agricultural development continued during the 1920s, aided by new irrigation projects and the introduction of new crops like cotton. The Salt River Project, completed in 1911, had transformed the Phoenix area into one of the most productive agricultural regions in the Southwest. Cotton became particularly important during the 1920s, and Arizona briefly became a major cotton producing state. The Great Depression and New Deal. The Great Depression hit Arizona hard, though perhaps not as severely as some other states. The collapse of copper prices devastated mining communities, and agricultural prices fell dramatically. Unemployment soared, and many recent migrants to the state left in search of work elsewhere. However, Arizona also benefited from several New Deal programs that provided employment and improved infrastructure. The Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, employed thousands of young Arizonans in projects throughout the state, building trails, roads, and facilities in national forests and parks. The Works Progress Administration, WPA, funded construction of schools, libraries, and other public buildings, many of which are still in use today. The most significant New Deal project in Arizona was the construction of Hoover Dam on the Colorado River. While the dam was actually located in Nevada, it provided crucial water and electricity to Arizona and laid the foundation for the state's future growth. The project employed thousands of workers and demonstrated the potential for large-scale federal water projects in the arid Southwest. Social and cultural changes. Early statehood Arizona remained a frontier society in many ways, but it was rapidly becoming more sophisticated and diverse. The state's cities grew and developed the cultural institutions, universities, museums, theaters, and libraries that characterized modern American communities. Arizona's universities expanded significantly during this period. The University of Arizona in Tucson grew from a small territorial institution to a major research university. Arizona State University, originally Arizona State Teachers College, was founded in Tempe in 1885 and began to develop into a significant educational institution. The period also saw increasing recognition and appreciation of Arizona's Native American cultures. The Fred Harvey Company, which operated hotels and restaurants along the Santa Fe Railway, played a crucial role in promoting Southwestern and Native American art and culture to tourists. While this commercialization sometimes distorted traditional cultures, it also provided economic opportunities for Native American artists and helped preserve traditional crafts. However, discrimination against racial and ethnic minorities remained common. Mexican Americans faced segregation in schools and public facilities, despite their constitutional rights. Native Americans were not granted full citizenship until 1924, and even then, Arizona refused to allow them to vote until forced to do so by federal courts in 1948. African Americans, though a small percentage of the population, also faced segregation and discrimination. Environmental awareness. Although environmentalism as a modern political movement had not yet emerged, early 20th century Arizona saw growing awareness of conservation issues. The federal government designated several national forests in Arizona during this period, recognizing the importance of protecting the state's watersheds and timber resources. The Grand Canyon was designated as a national park in 1919 after years of lobbying by conservationists who recognized its unique value. This designation helped establish tourism as a major industry in northern Arizona and demonstrated the economic value of preserving natural resources. Mining activities during this period also began to raise environmental concerns, though these were not yet widely recognized by the public. The massive open pit copper mines that were developed in the early 20th century created environmental impacts that would not be fully understood or addressed for decades. By 1930, Arizona had evolved from a frontier territory to a modern state, though it still retained much of its frontier character. The foundation had been laid for the dramatic growth that would transform Arizona in the second half of the 20th century. But the state was still primarily rural, dependent on mining and agriculture, and relatively isolated from national economic and political trends. The stage was set for the changes that would make Arizona one of America's fastest growing states and transform it into the modern Sunbelt powerhouse we know today. Chapter 6: Modern Arizona. The Sunbelt. Transformation. World War II. The Great Catalyst. World War II transformed Arizona more than any single event in its history. The state's clear skies, open spaces, and relative isolation made it ideal for military training and defense production, bringing an unprecedented federal investment that would reshape Arizona forever. The war brought numerous military installations to Arizona. Luke Air Force Base near Phoenix became one of the largest fighter training bases in the world. Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson trained bomber crews and later became a major aircraft storage facility. Williams Air Force Base, Kingman Army Airfield, and numerous smaller installations dotted the state. These bases brought over 100,000 military personnel to Arizona during the war, along with their families and thousands of civilian workers. Many of these people decided to stay after the war, contributing to Arizona's first major population boom of the modern era. The war also brought defense manufacturing to Arizona. Companies like Goodyear Aircraft, later Goodyear Aerospace, established major facilities in the Phoenix area, producing aircraft parts and later aerospace components. This marked the beginning of Arizona's transformation from a mining and agricultural economy to a modern, diversified economy. Perhaps most importantly, the war brought air conditioning to Arizona. Military bases and defense plants required climate control to function effectively, and the technology gradually spread to civilian applications. Air conditioning made Arizona's extreme summer heat bearable and opened the door for massive population growth in the post-war era. The post-war boom, 1945-1960, Arizona's post-war growth was explosive. The state's population grew from 499,000 in 1940 to 1.3 million in 1960, an increase of over 160%. This growth was concentrated primarily in the Phoenix and Tucson metropolitan areas, which began their transformation into major urban centers. Several factors drove this remarkable growth. The GI Bill enabled thousands of veterans to attend Arizona's universities, and many stayed after graduation. The state's climate attracted retirees from colder states, beginning Arizona's reputation as a retirement destination. Most importantly, the growth of air conditioning technology made Arizona's summers tolerable for people not accustomed to desert heat. Defense spending continued to be crucial to Arizona's economy during the Cold War. The state became a major center for aerospace and electronics manufacturing, with companies like Motorola, General Electric, and later Intel establishing major operations in the Phoenix area. This high-tech manufacturing base would prove crucial to Arizona's continued growth. Barry Goldwater, the Phoenix department store owner who became a U.S. Senator in 1952, emerged as one of the most influential conservative politicians in America during this period. Goldwater's 1964 presidential campaign, though unsuccessful, helped establish Arizona as a center of American conservative politics and brought national attention to the state. Water, the limiting factor. As Arizona grew, water became the critical limiting factor for continued development. The state's rapid population and economic growth was putting enormous pressure on limited water supplies, and it became clear that new sources of water were essential. The solution was the Central Arizona Project, CAP, one of the most ambitious water projects in American history. Proposed in the 1940s, the CAP faced decades of political opposition, particularly from California, which feared losing access to Colorado River water. The key breakthrough came in 1963 when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Arizona versus California, granting Arizona the right to 2.8 million acre-feet of Colorado River water annually. This cleared the way for congressional approval of the CAPI in 1968 after intense lobbying by Arizona's congressional delegation, particularly Senator Carl Hayden. Construction of the CAP began in the 1970s and was completed in 1993. The system consists of a 336-mile canal that carries Colorado River water from Lake Havasu to Phoenix and Tucson, along with numerous pumping stations, storage reservoirs, and distribution systems. The CAPI made continued growth possible and remains the foundation of Arizona's modern economy. The Civil Rights Era. Arizona's experience during the Civil Rights Movement was complex and often contradictory. The state had a relatively small African American population, but it also had significant Native American and Hispanic populations who faced discrimination and legal challenges. The most significant civil rights victory in Arizona was a 1948 federal court decision that forced the state to allow Native Americans to vote. Arizona had been one of the last states to deny voting rights to Native Americans, claiming they were not subject to state taxes and therefore not entitled to vote. School desegregation proceeded gradually in Arizona, without the massive resistance seen in some southern states. However, discrimination against Hispanic students was widespread, and many communities maintained separate Mexican schools well into the 1960s. Arizona's response to the national civil rights movement was mixed. While the state didn't experience the violent confrontations seen elsewhere, there was significant resistance to civil rights legislation. Arizona was one of only 6 states to vote against the 1964 Civil Rights Act in Congress. The most controversial moment came in 1987 when Arizona voters initially rejected a state holiday for Martin Luther King Jr. The decision sparked a national boycott of Arizona tourism and conventions, costing the state hundreds of millions of dollars. Voters finally approved the holiday in 1992, making Arizona the last state to establish the holiday. Environmental challenges and growth management. Arizona's rapid growth created significant environmental challenges. Air pollution became a serious problem in the Phoenix area by the 1970s, leading to federal intervention and strict emissions controls. Water quality issues emerged as growing cities strained aging infrastructure systems. The environmental movement gained strength in Arizona during the 1970s, leading to the creation of stronger environmental regulations and the preservation of additional public lands. The Arizona Wilderness Act of 1984 protected over 1.4 million acres of federal land in Arizona, ensuring that growth would not consume all of the state's natural landscapes. Urban sprawl became a major issue as Phoenix expanded rapidly in all directions, consuming thousands of acres of desert annually. Efforts to manage this growth included the creation of urban growth boundaries, the preservation of mountain preserves within urban areas, and the development of more sophisticated land use planning. Economic diversification. While defense spending and manufacturing remained important, Arizona's economy diversified significantly during the latter half of the 20th century. Tourism became a major industry, with destinations like the Grand Canyon, Sedona, and Scottsdale attracting millions of visitors annually. High-tech manufacturing expanded dramatically, earning Phoenix the nickname Silicon Desert. Companies like Intel, Motorola, and later microchip technology established major operations in Arizona. Attracted by the state's business-friendly climate, skilled workforce, and proximity to California markets, real estate development became another major driver of Arizona's economy. The state's rapid population growth created enormous demand for housing, shopping centers, and office buildings, making real estate one of Arizona's most important industries. Political evolution. Arizona's politics evolved significantly during the modern era. While the state remained generally conservative, it became more competitive as demographics changed. The growth of educated suburban professionals, increasing Hispanic population, and migration from more liberal states began to moderate Arizona's politics. The state produced several nationally prominent politicians during this period, including Barry Goldwater, Morris Udall, John McCain, and Sandra Day O'Connor, who became the first woman appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1981. Arizona also became known for political innovation, including early adoption of initiatives and referendums, campaign finance reform, and other progressive political reforms that contrasted with the state's conservative reputation on many issues. Immigration and demographics. Immigration, both domestic and international, reshaped Arizona's demographics dramatically during the modern era. The state's Hispanic population grew rapidly, both through migration from other parts of the United States and immigration from Mexico and Central America. This demographic change created both opportunities and tensions. Hispanic communities contributed enormously to Arizona's cultural richness and economic growth. But language barriers, economic competition, and cultural differences sometimes created conflict. Arizona's location on the Mexican border made it a major crossing point for undocumented immigration, creating political controversies that continue to influence state and national politics. Issues like bilingual education, voter identification requirements, and immigration enforcement became major political issues that helped define Arizona's modern political identity. By 2000, Arizona had completed its transformation from a sparsely populated frontier state to a major metropolitan region with over 5 million residents. The foundation was laid for Arizona to become one of America's fastest growing states in the early 21st century, but also for the challenges that rapid growth would bring. Chapter 7: Contemporary Arizona, the 21st Century, the New Millennium Boom. Arizona entered the 21st century with remarkable momentum. The 2000 census revealed that Arizona had become the second fastest growing state in the nation, with a population approaching 5.2 million. This growth accelerated through the early 2000s, driven by continued migration from other states, a booming real estate market, and the expansion of high-tech industries. The Phoenix metropolitan area became one of the fastest-growing urban regions in America, adding over 100,000 new residents annually at the peak of the boom. Entire new cities seemed to spring up overnight in the desert, places like Anthem, Ahwatukee, and Desert Ridge that represented the epitome of 21st century suburban development. This growth was fueled by several factors unique to the early 2000s. Low interest rates made home buying accessible to more people. Arizona's relatively affordable housing, compared to California, attracted many retirees and families seeking a better quality of life. The state's business-friendly policies continued to attract major corporations and manufacturing facilities. Technology and innovation. Arizona successfully positioned itself as a major center for technology and innovation. Intel's massive Chandler facilities became one of the company's most important manufacturing sites. Other tech giants like Motorola, Honeywell, and later Apple established major operations in the state. The University of Arizona and Arizona State University emerged as major research institutions contributing to innovation in fields ranging from astronomy and space exploration to renewable energy and biotechnology. ASU, in particular, underwent a dramatic expansion under President Michael Crow, becoming one of the largest universities in the United States and a leader in online education. Arizona also became a leader in renewable energy development, particularly solar power. The state's abundant sunshine made it an ideal location for solar installations, and Arizona became home to some of the largest solar facilities in the world. The Great Recession and its aftermath. Arizona's rapid growth came to a sudden halt with the Great Recession of 2008-2010. The state was hit particularly hard because its economy had become heavily dependent on real estate development and construction. When the housing bubble burst, Arizona experienced some of the highest foreclosure rates in the nation. Unemployment soared to over 10%, and the state government faced massive budget deficits as tax revenues plummeted. Many of the newest suburban developments became virtual ghost towns as construction stopped and residents lost their homes to foreclosure. The recession forced Arizona to confront some of the challenges that rapid growth had created. Infrastructure systems were strained beyond capacity. Water supplies, despite the Central Arizona Project, remained a long-term concern. Environmental degradation from rapid development became more apparent. Immigration controversies. Arizona became the center of national immigration debates in the early 21st century. The state's location on the Mexican border made it a primary crossing point for undocumented immigration, and the federal government's perceived failure to control the border led to increasing frustration among Arizona residents. This frustration culminated in 2010 with the passage of SB 1070, one of the strictest immigration laws in the nation. The law required police to check the immigration status of people they stopped if they had reasonable suspicion that the person was in the country illegally. SB 1070 sparked massive protests, boycotts, and legal challenges. The federal government sued to block the law, and the Supreme Court ultimately struck down most of its provisions. However, the controversy established Arizona as a symbol of immigration hardline policies and created divisions that continue to influence the state's politics. Political realignment. Arizona's rapid demographic changes began to alter its political landscape significantly. The state's growing Hispanic population, increasing numbers of college-educated professionals, and continued migration from more liberal states made Arizona more competitive politically. This shift became apparent in the 2018 and 2020 elections. In 2018, Democrat Kyrsten Sinema won election to the U.S. Senate, becoming the first Democrat elected to the Senate from Arizona since 1988. In 2020, Arizona voted for a Democratic presidential candidate, Joe Biden, for the first time since 1996, and Democrat Mark Kelly won the state's other Senate seat. These changes reflected broader demographic trends. Arizona's population became more diverse, more educated, and younger. The Phoenix and Tucson metropolitan areas, where most Arizonans now live, became more liberal, while rural areas remained strongly conservative. Climate change and water challenges. Arizona faces significant challenges from climate change and continued water scarcity. The Colorado River, source of much of Arizona's water through the Central Arizona Project, has experienced prolonged drought conditions that have reduced water deliveries to the state. These water challenges have forced Arizona to become a leader in water conservation and management. The state has developed sophisticated groundwater management systems, invested heavily in water recycling and reuse, and created water banking systems to store surplus water for future use. Climate change has also brought increased wildfire risks, more extreme heat events, and challenges to the state's agricultural sector. Arizona has responded by investing in renewable energy, improving building codes to address extreme heat, and developing new strategies for managing natural resources. COVID-19 and its impact. The COVID-19 pandemic had significant impacts on Arizona's economy and society. The state's tourism industry was particularly hard hit, as were small businesses throughout the state. However, Arizona's diversified economy proved more resilient than in previous recessions. The pandemic accelerated some existing trends, including the growth of remote work and the migration of people and businesses from more expensive states like California. Arizona benefited from these trends, attracting new residents and businesses even during the pandemic. Current challenges and opportunities. Today's Arizona faces both significant challenges and remarkable opportunities. The state continues to grow rapidly, with projections suggesting the population could reach 10 million by 2050. This growth brings economic opportunities, but also strains infrastructure and natural resources. Water remains the critical long-term challenge. Arizona has made remarkable progress in water conservation and management, but continued growth and climate change will require even more innovative solutions. The state is investing in new technologies like desalination and advanced water recycling. Arizona's economy has successfully diversified beyond its traditional bases in mining and agriculture. The state is now a major center for technology, aerospace, healthcare, and logistics. Major companies continue to relocate operations to Arizona, attracted by the state's business climate and quality of life. The state has also become a leader in several emerging industries. Arizona is home to major data centers that serve the western United States. The state has attracted significant investment in electric vehicle manufacturing and battery production. Renewable energy continues to expand rapidly. Arizona's universities continue to grow and innovate. ASU has become a model for 21st century higher education, while the University of Arizona remains a leader in research, particularly in space sciences and astronomy. Conclusion: Arizona's enduring spirit. As we reach the end of our journey through Arizona's remarkable history, it's worth reflecting on the themes that have defined this extraordinary state for over 12,000 years. From the Hohokam engineers who turned the desert into gardens, to the Spanish missionaries who built lasting communities in harsh environments, to the American pioneers who risked everything for silver and gold, to the modern entrepreneurs who transformed Phoenix into a major metropolitan area. Arizona's story has always been about people who saw opportunity where others saw only obstacles. Arizona's history is a story of adaptation and innovation. Every group that has called Arizona home, from ancestral Puebloans to Apache, from Mexican ranchers to Chinese miners, from Mormon farmers to Silicon Valley refugees, has had to find ways to thrive in one of North America's most challenging environments. That necessity has bred a culture of independence, creativity, and resilience that continues to define Arizona today. It's also a story of diversity and conflict. Arizona has always been a meeting place of cultures. Indigenous, Spanish, Mexican, and American traditions have blended and clashed here for centuries. These encounters haven't always been peaceful or fair, but they have created a unique cultural landscape that makes Arizona unlike any other place in America. The land itself has been a constant character in Arizona's story. The Grand Canyon has inspired millions of visitors and helped establish America's national park system. The Sonoran Desert has challenged human ingenuity while providing stunning beauty and unique ecosystems. Arizona's mountains have yielded mineral wealth that built cities and fortunes. The Colorado River has provided the water that made modern Arizona possible. Perhaps most importantly, Arizona's history demonstrates the power of human determination to overcome seemingly impossible challenges. When the Hohokam needed water for their crops, they built one of North America's most sophisticated irrigation systems. When Spanish missionaries wanted to establish communities in the desert, they learned to work with indigenous peoples and adapt to local conditions. When American settlers faced Apache resistance, they eventually found ways to coexist. When modern Arizona needed water for millions of new residents, they built the Central Arizona Project. Today's Arizona continues to face significant challenges: water scarcity, rapid population growth, climate change, and political divisions all present serious problems that will require the same kind of innovation and determination that have characterized Arizona's history for millennia. But Arizona's history gives us reason for optimism. This is a state that has always attracted people willing to take risks and work hard to build something better. It's a place where different cultures and ideas have come together to create something new and uniquely American. It's a land where natural beauty coexists with human achievement, where ancient traditions inform modern innovations, and where the spirit of the frontier lives on in 21st century form. From the ancient petroglyphs on canyon walls to the gleaming skyscrapers of downtown Phoenix, from the missions of Father Kino to the laboratories of modern universities, from the silver mines of Tombstone to the technology centers of Tempe, Arizona's story is one of continuous transformation and enduring values. As Arizona moves forward into an uncertain but promising future, it carries with it the lessons of its remarkable past. That success comes through adaptation and innovation, that diversity is a source of strength, that natural resources must be carefully managed, and that the greatest achievements come from people who refuse to accept that something cannot be done. The Grand Canyon State has been shaped by 12,000 years of human history, but in many ways, Arizona's greatest chapters may still be unwritten. The same spirit that built Hohokam canals and Spanish missions, that created territorial mining towns and modern metropolitan areas, continues to drive Arizona forward into the future. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Arizona's incredible history, from ancient civilizations to modern metropolises, from territorial conflicts to contemporary challenges. Arizona's story continues to unfold. Like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments what aspect of Arizona's history you found most fascinating and what you think the next chapter might bring.